The argument is so wrong. Have you heard of the, in 1917, there was a sculpture of a toilet called Fountain. Have you ever heard of this? Because you're so obviously wrong. Like, how could you possibly say something so stupid unless you hate trans people? That's the point of the comment, right? He's picking the hypothetical to farm the moral outrage. If he can show that your position right now is as offensive as the position of a phrenologist or a racist that doesn't think black people are human, he's kind of won the argument optically.
There's only so many layers of illiteracy that I can cut through. Let's
Oh my God. If all things are arbitrary and socially constructed, then there's only one reason to construct something, and that's because it yields some social good. And if you disagree with his construction, you therefore disagree with the social good. He's just trying to make you understand that the only way we organize things is for whatever gives us the most amount of good. So if you disagree with his level of organization, you're a bad person. That's essentially what the argument boils down to.
Yeah, just to give some background, the reason I wanted to talk more or less was I'm having trouble figuring out how to do debates against the Breadtubers. They have a very strange debating style. It's very confusing to me, and trying to learn how to debate them. So my position on like the statement, is it transphobic to say trans women are not women? I'd say not in all cases, kind of for a similar reason to what you said about the 1350 in your manifesto. Like, it's not, you can't say it's inherently like racist, what's dog whistle or whatever, because it's just a true fact, and you can't just like deny true facts. And you have to ask like a second clarifying question: is it the case that it's 1350 because of socioeconomic reasons, or are just black people more inherently violent? And then that really clarifies whether they're just stating it as a fact or are inherently using it to be racist. And I think the same thing applies to like wait, statement.
Can you oh God, I'm getting feedback. Sorry. I don't think you. Hold on. Hello.
Hey.
Well, I'm getting like a one-to-one feedback that's happening as I talk.
But yeah. So my position on trans issues, I think that it's completely legitimate for people to have adopted a definition of woman that refers to like something corresponding to biological sex, and they did this way before ever even hearing about trans issues. And I think that similar to like 1350 is just a completely rational way to come up with a definition. And so it's not fair to simply say that anybody who uses this definition is inherently transphobic. It's just a natural way to come up with language. So I think that it's what most Breadtubers say, that anyone who says trans women aren't women is inherently transphobic is just false and irrational. And that's why I took these debates, to try and hash out that position.
Okay. Have you stopped to try to think what's happening in these conversations, or why do you think they're taking those positions?
Sort of. So I think that their position is mostly they want to help vindicate, validate the feelings of the people in the trans community and support as much as they can, something along those lines.
Yeah. So I think basically what happens is they're arriving at what they think are factually true positions, but they're not searching for them with like fact-finding glasses. They're kind of using like moral or sociologically good glasses. And then whatever facts they can either find or invent that support that moral endpoint is the one that they end up going for. So in the conversation, like, are trans women women? You might be thinking in your head, like ontologically, like, what is a woman? What is a trans woman? Like, are these things the same, et cetera, et cetera? Like, that might be your process. But in their head, they're thinking, well, if we say that trans women are women, it makes everybody happy, or at least trans women happy. So like, we're going to do that. I think that's the difference in thought process.
Yeah, I totally see that in a lot of ways. But I think they are going further than that. I think in their mind, they literally think it's true. They think that there is some truth value to this, that it genuinely is the case, not just that it makes them feel better, but that they're right about this, like factually correct in some way. But when you ask them to try to like instantiate what are the reasons that make this right, or try to use like a parody analogy, like the attack helicopter or whatever, they can't identify any like strict criteria or principles that differentiate their preferred position from the counterexample, like the attack helicopter. They just say, oh, it makes us feel bad, therefore it must be inherently wrong. Kind of like how religious people say anything that goes against the Bible is just evil, and therefore it must be wrong, without ever trying to give a rational justification. And so they use like a lot of arguments from analogies and comparison, appeals to emotion. But I think they genuinely believe that they're factually correct on these issues. And
I think that I think that the if we have like the shepherds and the sheep, where the sheep people are like people that will, most of us inherit most of our positions just because of the communities that we're in. So like, for instance, if you were to ask me like, is my car going to work or something? I'm going to say, yeah, I push the gas and it goes. I don't really understand why, or I don't understand really. Well, I mean, I do, but like somebody might not understand any of the underlying mechanisms of like, what's the difference between like an engine and what's the difference between like a tire and a wheel, but they know that the car works. And I think a lot of our kind of moral positions are like that, or even a lot of our, maybe you can say metaphysical positions are like that too. We just kind of like inherit things from other people. So for normal people, when you ask them are trans women and they say yes, they might say yes, but I don't think it's because they've done like a really deep dive about it. They've really thought hard about it and come to that position. I think they're just kind of like inheriting the social values of the people around them, and then they kind of like they're doing that. Now there's an argument to be made for people like Vaush or whatever that maybe should know better. But the way that people like him engage in philosophy makes it really hard to tell if they're making mistakes or if they're just being bad faith or what. It's very, 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 very confusing.
Yeah, that's the core of the issue, because you would expect people who engage in these debates publicly have some kind of a rational justification for their position. And that's the part I'm interested in is Vaush doing this deliberately? Is he using obfuscation deliberately, or is it something more like fundamental? Because it's not just him. It's like all of the Breadtubers have a strange way of making arguments that are more just appeals to emotion, arguments from analogy, but don't actually try to hash out what the actual core principles are in their argument. And I don't know if that's intentional, or is it simply because of their like inherent like postmodern ideology kind of a thing, where there just aren't such things and it's just mostly some kind of an argument from analogy. But
yeah, I don't like to call it postmodern because I think there's a great deal of effort and thought that goes into like, deconstructing past ideas, and postmodernist thinkers put a lot of work into what they were writing about, what they were talking about. So calling it postmodern seems almost like a cheat. I think it's literally just this is a moral position that feels good, and I'm going to do whatever the fuck I can to post hoc reason my way into this argument. And I think that's more or less what ends up happening with a lot of these people. Especially, I don't know, is that what your conversation with Vaush was about?
Well, it started on Super Straight. So this was like one of my earliest debates on this topic. And so I didn't really understand that a more core topic was the Are Trans Women topic until like during, like in the middle of this debate, we just transitioned to that topic because I realized it was more significant. But we started off on taking the Super Straight position because it was just relevant at the time.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm familiar. How long ago was this conversation about Super Straight?
Like a year ago.
Okay, because I was gonna say that hasn't been talked about for a while, but okay, gotcha. Well, yeah. Well, what do you want to do? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, I'm just gonna start the debate and let me know if you want to just stop it at any point to say anything.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Vaush, for joining. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation, as always. So I think one of the problems with the woke SJW feminist ideology is that they don't differentiate between rational criticism and hate, calling anyone who criticizes their position racist, transphobic, sexist, misogynist, etc. These morally charged terms are essentially calling someone evil or immoral, and that there's something wrong with the character of the person, which is why they get just ignored. This is used as a strategy to dismiss any kind of rational criticism, and to say that any position that has these qualities of being transphobic has no rational use whatsoever, which is clearly false.
Is there a way you can get the audio up on
the Super
a little
Straight,
bit?
Label is a perfect example of this. The point of the Super Straight label, its valid non-transphobic point, is an internal criticism of the woke ideology's tendency to accept some psychological identities but not accept other psychological identities. It has nothing to do with transphobia. That just happens to be the one thing that some people aren't attracted to the idea of being in a relationship with a trans person. It isn't about targeting trans people, because people who typically don't like the SJW community or like trans people in general, don't adopt identities in the first place. So this Super Straight identity was never meant as something legitimate that people were going to accept and that the woke community was going to accept, and then everyone was going to be happy and just accept anyone who was identified in Super Straight and anything they said. No, the whole point here was to show the hypocrisy of the woke community because they won't accept this identity, even though it is the genuine, true psychological state of these people. It's not meant to single out trans people and to treat them any differently. It's meant to show the hypocrisy of the trans community because they won't accept the genuine identities of certain groups the groups who they don't think are worthy of accepting. So I think that because super straight has a legitimate use, which is not transphobic, it is inappropriate to call it transphobic. You can call certain people who use it in a racist manner or a transphobic manner transphobic, but you can't call the concept itself transphobic. Saying that it originated from a transphobic person or a transphobic goal is irrelevant. It's a genetic fallacy. The fact that if a Nazi invented some concept and in that concept was something valuable that other people in society latched onto and said, oh, this was actually a really good argument. The fact that he's a Nazi doesn't mean that anyone who uses the argument is also a Nazi. It's a hasty generalization fallacy. So because super straight does have a legitimate use as a critique of the woke community's hypocrisy, it is not intrinsically in any way transphobic, even though some people who use it may use it in a transphobic manner, and I will conclude there.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that opening statement. We'll kick it over to Vaush for his opening statement. Want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. And we want to let you know, we hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you're from. And so with that, thanks, Vaush, for being with us as well. The floor is all yours for your opening.
Thank you. I feel very welcome. Okay, well, I'm glad that we immediately dropped the idea that this was some kind of like legitimate sexuality that we're trying to recognize and that it's in some way equivocable to being straight or pan or bi, because I don't think anyone meaningfully used it in that way. And people who argue that it is being used in that way are probably arguing in bad faith. So your argument is that it exists as some kind of critique of a hypocrisy on the part of the quote unquote woke community. Unfortunately, I think you failed to describe and substantiate that accusation of hypocrisy. If you're arguing that it is hypocritical for a group of people to say that it's illegitimate to not be attracted to trans people and that this mistake on their part is in some way comparable to a mistake of not recognizing a sexual identity, this to me seems like a really, really big reach. And there is transphobia rooted pretty much directly into the nature of this critique as you describe it. So a couple of points. First of all,
do you notice that he does this a lot, where it's just because this is
so he just said a ton of stuff and we didn't really respond to any of the argument at all. He kind of spent the time like attacking other people that make arguments that you didn't make. For I have no idea what the fuck he just said, or I don't know how many of it was relevant to what was.
Well, you've been on Modern Debate before, so the first part is a introduction. You're supposed to introduce your position to defend something you said, and he's just essentially responding to what I said and saying I don't like that. So he's kind of skipped over the first stage of like making his case. Do you notice he does that a lot? Where because you're supposed to start by like making your case for the argument, right?
Oh, sure.
It's just I don't. Does he always do this? Is there a way to actually get him to try and make a case?
Depends on the topic as you're talking about. I mean, there's more of the opening statement to go, right? So maybe he's getting into that. I mean, you've already been here, but
sure.
Super straight absolutely targets trans people. Let's not pretend otherwise. Even if we're to ignore the history and the communities around it, I mean, the people making the critiques matter, obviously. It contextualizes the way in which those critiques are made. The term super straight, like, okay, so you're straight if you like trans people. Say you're a cis guy and you like, women, and you like trans women, and that's straight. But then if you don't like the trans women, only the cis women, that's super straight, as though it's more straight to not be attracted to the trans women and thus logically less straight to also be attracted to the trans women. I mean, the premise there is pretty clear. It's not like I don't think that's a huge reach. The implication there is pretty clearly like, oh, no, hold on. I'm not just straight. Okay, I don't like trans women. All right, I only like real women. I'm super straight. That's kind of how it is. I just don't see the hypocrisy here. There's this meme that trans people are like screaming and shouting, everyone has to be attracted to us, everyone has to want to date us, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're referring to an incredible minority of the broader trans community. The vast majority of trans people, let me tell you, do not want to be shacked up with somebody with whom they have to fight for the legitimacy of their identity. I just don't think there are that many woke progressives screaming that if you're straight, then you should want to have sex with every trans woman. I don't think that's happening that much. And then to go ahead and say, like, in response to these, and to the extent that they do exist, it's very obnoxious. To the extent that this minority of a minority exists, I will now play up this, like, to your admission, fake sexuality that implies trans women aren't like real women to highlight a hypocrisy. I don't think it's a broader community hypocrisy. I just think we're talking about bad behavior in a really, really, really small, very marginal portion of the trans community. So if your argument is, I shouldn't have to be attracted to trans people, okay, you can be attracted to whoever you want to be attracted to. I don't think people are out there like trying to press people's boundaries on that. People don't want to be in relationships with people. They have to argue into being attracted to them. The only thing I'd argue is, trans women are women and trans men are men, I guess. And that you should, as with all things, be fairly open-minded, because it's entirely possible that
Okay, well, hold on. Can we
interested in lie out.
I'm sorry. My brain might just be too small for this conversation. I haven't heard any arguments yet. He's not like saying anything of value yet, right?
No, yeah, exactly. So he's essentially just making moral comparisons. He's saying,
basically, and like saying like only bad people will do this other thing, and well, we should obviously do this thing. Yeah, there hasn't been a single argument given yet. It's all just kind of like you either accept this at face value or you're wrong or bad. But okay,
yeah, I think that's just like. Yeah. It's really interesting that this happens a lot in these kinds of debates, because it seems like the core of their argument is more like they compare some position they don't like with some other position they don't like, and say because they have similar feelings toward these two positions, they're the same, but they never actually explain what the core similarity is. I think later in the debate, Vaush compares something to, when we get into the trans women argument, he compares it to like disenfranchising black people from being human or something.
Sure.
And he says, like, oh, these are the same thing, but he doesn't explain like what is the reason they're the same. What is the criterion? At the end, he says it's something like because you're not accepting people for what they want to be accepted by. But if that's your main argument, that would also apply to like the attack helicopter or the super straight thing. It doesn't really give us a criterion to distinguish which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. It just seems to be like making an emotional appeal.
Yeah. Okay,
outside whatever boundaries you may have set in your head. It's only because I was open-minded about my interest that I discovered I was bisexual or pan or whatever. And, that's me. And maybe that's not the case for everyone, but it never hurts to be open-minded. So I guess in summary, I really don't think there's a hypocrisy here. And I don't think that an admittedly transphobic meme is a good way of addressing that hypocrisy. So that's my point.
You got it. Thanks very much, Vaush. And we are going to jump into the open dialogue. So, gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Want to let you know, folks, a couple of things. One is open dialogue is free-flowing. However, if it gets too rowdy, I'll jump in and restrain it to 3-minute intervals back and forth. And also want to let you know, folks, we have many juicy upcoming debates. And so don't forget to hit that subscribe button for many of those juicy debates, including this Saturday as TJump and Nathan Thompson collide for the first time. So with that, the floor is all yours, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so the hypocrisy is that the woke community, like, again, you're right, it's a very small minority of people who actually think that you should want to be in a relationship with a trans person. That's not the point here. The point here is that the much larger thing that does happen is the woke community wants you to accept their identities, their preferred identities, but doesn't want to accept identities they don't accept. That's the hypocrisy. And this is technically sort of a genuine identity. There are a certain group of people who genuinely don't want to date trans people. So that is a genuine identity, even though people who do that don't actually accept identities. So it should be respected in the same sense as the other ones, because they are honestly representing what they feel and believe. And the hypocrisy is, of course, the fact that the woke community won't accept their feelings, where they will try to force them to accept other people's feelings, not to date them, but just in general, their identity, accepting the identity
Isn't
itself.
this just the attack helicopter meme then? You believe in like tri-genders, but you won't accept my helicopter gender. Isn't this just that over again, but like 6 years later?
That's why it's so popular, is because it has the exact same
But it was really
connotations.
stupid back then too.
Well,
because
your opinion of it being stupid doesn't make it transphobic.
So
the fact that you don't like the criticism doesn't make it a not legitimate criticism.
So I'll substantiate. So first of all, what you're positing is the idea that all identities are equally legitimate, which I don't think anyone has ever argued for. And you just admitted that this identity was a meme. By your own admission, the identity, this super straight thing, is deserving of less legitimacy than, say, heterosexuality or homosexuality. You already acknowledged that in the opening statement that you made.
Not exactly, no. So, for example, if the people who didn't want to date trans people did want to accept identities as a category, then they could actually adopt this as a true, genuine identity because it is truly what they feel. They obviously don't. They don't care about identities. They think they're a joke. And so they adopted this as a joke to show the hypocrisy in the woke community.
You can't play both sides of this. You can't say, oh, well, it's not really a serious identity, so I want it to be examined as a critique. And then when it's critiqued as a critique, you're saying, well, actually, no, it basically is a serious identity. It's just a matter of how seriously you want to take it. You can't oscillate between those two positions. It has to be one or the other.
I'm not understanding your position here. So I can do it.
Yeah.
It's okay. Okay. I don't know how much of this I can listen to. I'm sorry. The argument is so wrong. Have you heard of the in 1917 there was a sculpture of a toilet called Fountain? You ever heard of this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, submitted to an art gallery. And I think the point of that was it was literally something you piss in. It was a toilet. It was submitted to a art gallery, and it was supposed to be. I think part of it was a critique of art. What is art? What do we consider art? You know. And you can't say that if somebody submits something like this to a museum, this is a critique of art, okay? What do we think about it? And you go, well, actually, I don't have to engage with the concept at all because that's just your critique. Like the critique begs or wants engagement. That's the whole point of the critique. Just because somebody makes something as a critique doesn't mean then that you don't have to engage with that object. You just say, oh, well, I'm not engaging with that because it's a critique. That's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire fucking life. Sorry. It's so stupid.
Well, yeah. So he said something there that was important that I didn't catch the first time. He says that some identities are legitimate and others aren't, and
which is kind of what you guys are getting towards, right?
Yeah.
That should be the next part of this conversation. Okay, well, how do you determine what a legitimate identity is? But it seems like he's laid out, well, if an identity is created as a critique, that identity is de facto illegitimate, regardless of what the identity is. But that doesn't get us any closer to the answer. You're almost like begging the question. Well, what is a real identity? It's an identity that I say is an identity, or it's like, well, I don't know what you mean by that, right? Yeah. But
yeah, it seems like he's making an appeal to motive. It says like a real identity is one that is intended to be a real identity. And if it's intended as a critique, well, then it doesn't count simply because its intent was a parody.
Yeah. And not even does it not count, but it's like somehow escapes analysis or is incapable of being, yeah, it's just ridiculous. Okay, go for it.
An internal critique of like Christianity and say, if God exists, God's a bastard because he killed lots of babies. But I don't believe God exists. So I can present an idea and say, by your standards, this should be accepted, even though I don't think it should be accepted. So
you're saying that the standards of trans people or woke community is that every sexuality should be accepted any time a person says something is a sexuality?
I think that any genuine position that you actually feel because of who you are should be accepted, yes.
But I've never heard a woke person say that. What if a person came up with the term giga straight and it's that they're only attracted to white people or white people of the opposite sex? If somebody came out with a term like that, I would join the rest of the quote woke community in saying, in addition to that being pretty racist, I also don't think that's legitimate identity. I think you're just kind of racist and you're just trying to find a way to use our terminology to get away with it.
Okay, wait.
The argument isn't that
I think hopefully this is the direction you're going. But like after this, then the obvious follow-up question should be like, okay, well, like what is a legitimate identity? What makes it legitimate? That should be where this conversation goes. Yeah.
I wish. I don't think I caught it at the time period because this is one of my earlier debates on the topic. So I'm trying to just go with what he's saying to discover if there's any value to it into relating to the conversation. And so I'm not sure what he's trying to bring up, and I'm just going to accept essentially all of his analogies.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you figured this out yet. Yeah, that's a big problem that I have because I feel really confident in a debate. It's like, oh yeah, we can walk wherever you want. I'll go follow you to the end of the earth. But what happens is I'll win like 10 points in a row, but I won't get any concessions because they'll keep hopping. And then they'll get on one point that I either can't argue well or I'm genuinely wrong on. And now it looks like I've lost the whole argument because I didn't pull a single concession out of them, but I'm willing to make a concession when I'm wrong on something, but no one has seen them. You can see a single point. So yeah, you have to be very aggressive at like holding on to the reins of where the conversation is going. Like, hold on, we're going to finish out this topic or we're going to figure this out or something, rather than letting them just kind of like walk you around, because if they're walking you around, it's probably because they don't have a good grasp on what's being spoken about.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of my weaknesses in this debate because when I start on a topic, the first thing I do is I just let the opponent do whatever they want as like an exploratory mission, like see what kind of points they're bringing up and see if I can learn something from it. But yeah, in the case of Breadtubers, it doesn't seem to do that. They just seem to bring up a whole bunch of different points, but never actually spell out what the key issues are.
Mhm.
And so it's difficult to learn from these guys. Do you know of any decently honest breadtubers who can discuss this issue to really like try to hammer out what the position is?
No. The problem is most of these things are like they're very like morally charged positions, and they're so because they're morally charged, you can't really disagree because if you disagree, you're kind of like an evil person, and that means that there's not really room for legitimate conversation, right? Like if I were to ask somebody to legitimately defend like pro or anti-rape, like people wouldn't be able to do it because like nobody. Fuck, I'm diving into a really thing, but do you know who Amos E is?
Nope.
Kind of a pedophile, or actually, I think maybe actually pedophile. He was a guy a long time ago who thought that the age of consent should be 0. You should be able to have adult human people fucking 0-year-old babies if they wanted to, as long as you're not hurting the baby. That was his argument. And something that I noticed at the time was he started to make his rounds through the skeptic community at the time, and nobody could actually give a convincing argument for why what he was saying was wrong. And when I listened to people argue, I was like, holy shit, you guys don't actually understand any of the arguments around consent. But the reason why is because they'd never heard anybody like argue against it. Nobody's pro-rape, right? So in the same vein as that, for these people, nobody's legitimately giving counter arguments for these types of like things related to trans people. So they've never heard the counter arguments. So when you present one, they basically just run down the, well, you must be evil route, and they can't really logically justify any of their feelings on the matter. It's almost like a form of moral confounding or moral confusing. There's some word there, but yeah, go ahead.
Do you think like in the case of rape, there are justifiable reasons against it? And do you think that the leftist community can actually find those and inhibit those? Are there such reasons that could actually justify this position, or is it all purely just moralizing?
For why rape is bad?
No, for like the trans issues, for super straight, for saying trans women aren't women. Do you think they have justifiable reasons? Like in the case of rape, there definitely are. Do you think there are similar cases in the kinds of issues that I debate Vaush with?
For the super straight thing, there are arguments against the term super straight, but they're going to be like high level abstractions of harm. Like, but he would have to concede the merit. He would have to concede the fact of the matter. Like super straight can be a legitimate orientation for sure, but like the way that we address it and talk about it could probably be done in an antagonistic manner. So like that would be the argument you have to take. But to just deny the identity or that somebody could be a straight person unwilling to fuck trans people, like that category is probably a real orientation. I'm sure there are people that really feel that way. And to outhandedly like reject that while also not giving a qualification for what is a legitimate identity, that's an untenable position. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to hear.
Yeah, and the same thing would apply to his only want to date white people example. Like I think some people are genuinely only attracted to certain races and not others. I don't think that's like a strange thing to have. So even though he thinks that's like inherently racist, like I'm not sure it would count as inherently racist, because I think that your biology determines what you're attracted to more or less, along with some psychology stuff. And I don't think it's inherently racist to not be attracted to certain kinds of features.
Yeah, not inherently. It could be, but not inherently. Yeah.
Everything that one could potentially call a sexuality is legitimate. We're just trying to give names and concepts and respect to legitimate, elements of human identity.
So what makes it legitimate? Why would
just if you're not attracted to trans people, and I would be interested, I guess, in examining the extent to which this is the case or the categories by which you define trans people. But if you're not, that's fine. But you don't need to create a whole new sexuality, one that you admit is tenuously serious, because you're not attracted to like a specific group. Because in this case, it's pretty transphobic, and that's really what it's being criticized for.
How is that any different from not being attracted to women or not being attracted to men, not being attracted to the trans group?
So by suggesting that not being attracted to trans people and not being attracted to women are similar, you're kind of implying that trans women aren't women. You recognize that, right?
There's definitely a difference between the two biologically. So it's like a psychological state.
There's a difference between trans women and cis women, but trans women are in the group woman. So this is what I mean exactly.
No.
You can't argue the identity is not transphobic.
Here is applied by the person. So as a person, someone can categorize women as biological women, and that's what they mean by women. And so trans people would not be in that category.
And that would be a transphobic description, which is why it's criticized for being transphobic.
It's not transphobic. It's quite accurate. Like they can define it that way.
Wait, hold on.
How is that denigrating to
biologists don't use the term biological woman. So scientific accuracy isn't what you should be deferring to here. If your argument is that the term you use to describe women doesn't include trans women, then yeah, it's transphobic.
How is that transphobic? It's just a categorization.
It
doesn't say anyone is
wait,
more
hold on,
or
wait.
less.
I can't tell if you're being serious right now.
No, I'm completely serious.
Women aren't women is like this.
What do you want to say?
The Vaush are funny. I can't tell if you're being serious right now. It's funny.
Yeah, I do. I find that really weird. Like, I think that's just, he clearly knew I was serious. He was just like playing to his audience. And that
the rhetorical thing, because you're so obviously wrong. Like, how could you possibly say something so fucking stupid unless you hate trans people? Like that's the point of the comment, right?
Yeah. And I think he's, for the next like 5 minutes, he doesn't answer the question, because I think right there I asked, like, what makes it transphobic? But now he's just going to go on this rail about analogies and things, and he doesn't like give a criterion to help us understand the answer to the question.
Mm-hmm.
Central argument over whether or not X or Y is transphobic. Are you asking me why it's transphobic to say trans women aren't women?
To say that I think women are biologically determined and not psychologically determined.
The central social conceit of trans people and of political movements surrounding them is arguing that they are the gender they identify as. Okay. And determining that is not the case, or saying that that is not the case, is considered transphobic for the same reason that, like, 17th century phrenologists tried to argue that black people weren't the same type of human as white people were. Now, you can adopt a 17th century phrenologist definition if you want to, and I also have the right to call you racist for it. So that would be kind of the line.
You didn't answer the question. So to say it's transphobic, you need to show that saying one is more or less in some sense. Just saying I factually disagree with how you define woman and I think this is the correct way to define woman doesn't imply anyone's more or less. It's just saying I disagree with your definition. That's not transphobic to disagrray. That's the problem with the
So
woke
do you
community.
think a definition of human that excluded black people would be a racist definition?
It depends. It can be and it may not be.
So wait, hold on. You're arguing that there are ways in which you could define human that don't include black people, and that wouldn't be racist.
Maybe if you had like some scientific evidence, if you literally thought.
How do you scientifically decide
this is a hypothetical.
the category of human?
So again, this is hypothetical. Like if someone injected
Hold on, wait, stop for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Careful when you play hypothetical games with these people, because they're not genuinely looking for hypotheticals. They're picking hypotheticals based on a kind of like faux moral outrage. Like, that's the goal. Like, let's say that you and me are arguing, like, do you think that PC gamers or Xbox gamers are better? And I'm like, well, I think that PC gamers are better. And it's like, well, I think that Xbox gamers are better because, like, Xbox is like it's easier to afford. It doesn't cost as much as a PC. And then you're like, well, I don't know. And it's like, okay, well, do you think that it's fair that black people were enslaved because they didn't have as much money as white people? Because you're basically trying to make an argument that, like, people with more, like, it'll be like an out there analogy, and you might try to grapple with it, like this one. Like, can you include a definition of human that doesn't include black people in a highly intellectualized manner? Maybe you could, or I'm sure you could. We could all theoretically invent new categories of things that would include certain groups of people. But all the audience is hearing is like, wow, he's trying to exclude trans people the same way that phrenologists tried to exclude black people. And that's the goal of him reaching to an analogy like that. He's not looking for like a good faith hypothetical to like test any sort of logical consistency. He's picking the hypothetical to farm the moral outrage. If he can show that your position right now is as offensive as the position of a phrenologist or a racist that doesn't think black people are human, he's kind of won the argument optically. So you're trying to play this game where you're trying to engage on like a logical or reasonable level, and he's just looking for like the moral optics of the conversation, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized that was, I don't know if that's a mistake though or not, because for me, I'm like, I want to take the most challenging position because I can learn more about it that way and see if there actually is some kind of similarity between the two. And so from my position, I really don't care about how I look from like an optics perspective.
Yeah, you can do it. If you don't care, that's fine. Just know that, like, when you're coming away from debates like this, especially since Vaush has the larger audience, the prevailing opinion in communities is going to be, oh, I remember that argument with TJump. He was really transphobic, and he seems like he probably hates trans people. That's going to be the takeaway that people have. You might even hate black people, actually, you know?
Yeah, I did get a lot of that on Twitter, quite a bit. But I think it's an interesting argument nonetheless to think, like, can you come up with a definition of black people that excludes them from being human without it being racist? And I think this is an interesting thing. Like, if for example, the analogy I use in a few minutes in debate is like if they have alien DNA or something, that would make them not human by definition, or you can say that they're greater than human by definition. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But I think that like if there's some definition in the case of trans women, to bring it back to the topic was, if you have a definition that you've come up with because of something else in society at the time period, and it's something that was pre-existing, then I think that would be different than deliberately creating a definition to exclude people after you discovered those people exist. So like if you discovered black people and you said you wanted to exclude them from being human and you came up with a definition explicitly to exclude them, that would clearly be racist. But if you had a definition like prior in mind, like a certain DNA combination or something, and then you discovered they didn't have that DNA combination, then I wouldn't consider that to be racist. So I think like the intention or origin of the definition actually can make it either not racist or racist. In that case, like if it's a pre-existing definition, I wouldn't consider it racist.
Sure, potentially, yeah. Just know that that's not you might be engaging that way, but that's not how he's engaging with us. But yeah,
for sure. All right.
They wouldn't be as human as other races. So yes, you can come up with a definition.
So let's say right now you had a scientist who said, oh yeah, okay, there are two species of Homo sapiens on Earth. Okay, there are humans and then there are black people. And
So
my
wait,
definition,
wait,
please allow me to finish the hypothetical. And my definition of human has, you have to have below a certain melanin count. Okay. Now, do you think that'd be a racist definition? Because it's scientifically accurate. You can determine the amount of melanin in the skin.
So again, that's irrelevant to the question. You asked, can you come up with a definition of human that would show one group was not the same? And yes, the obvious answer is yes. If they had DNA, which is the qualification of one of the features that makes someone human,
what a human
is
a social construct.
No, it's
we
not.
arrived at that by determining.
No, I don't.
can you pause for 1 second, just because I have a feeling you guys are going to run around on this stupid fucking point for a while. I take responsibility for this because I kind of like where a lot of these people came from, and I talked about this a while ago. But these guys, a lot of Breadtubers now, especially a lot of like the descendants now of Vaush, have a really big problem with the term social construct. So when something is socially constructed, it means that like basically a society, you know, there might be something that doesn't exist naturally in the universe. We make like a category of something, or we recognize some emergent object or some bullshit like that. The way that these guys use social construct is there is an entirely arbitrary thing that could be anything at any point in time, and it has no meaning or anything, and it just is what it is. So it can be anything. Anytime somebody like this that comes from like Vaush's wheelhouse or anything, you hear them say the word social construct, you have to get ready to be like, you have to be ready to hear the dumbest shit you've ever heard in your entire life, because it's about to be a whole bunch of stupid shit.
Yeah, that's like me and Vaush went down the same route as Vaush and Thomas Bogardus. I know you talked about him with his debate with Vaush. Was the same thing. We're like trying to define things to make it correspond to reality. It's like, no, words just mean nothing. They're all just completely arbitrary.
Which is funny because the whole point of a social construct or word is the exact opposite. It's that it's not arbitrary. You've picked out a distinct sound to represent a distinct thing because it's not arbitrary. There is a level of arbitrarity in that it could have been something different, but that doesn't make the whole thing arbitrary, right? Yeah, it's a really, really, really dumb.
And I think the argument is that if we're trying to make words the least arbitrary, the most useful, we want them to correspond to something in reality that's a common feature that most people engage with on a regular basis, and that would have more utility than something we just say like woman is a potato or something.
Yeah.
It's not.
Wait, TJump. That's not an ideology. You can ask a scientist if you want to. The way in which we define
humans
species,
an empirical fact outside of any social construct. Yes, they are a species.
The category of humanity doesn't exist outside of our socially constructed category.
It definitely does.
Wait, TJump. There's only so many layers of illiteracy that I can cut through. Let's
Oh my God.
for a second. Now, what a woman is, what woman means, is something that we kind of arrived at. We didn't understand what woman was like 300,000 years ago. How we've described what a woman is has changed over time. Likewise, our understanding of speciesation has changed over time. We describe these things in relation to how much utility they provide us. Now, it's possible to arrive at a definition of humanity that doesn't include black people, because you can arrive at a definition of anything as long as you're willing to change the definition.
No.
So would you think that's racist to be there are humans?
Everything you're saying is just completely incoherent here. You're just not understanding how reality works. So science defines terms based off its correspondence to reality. We care about the reality thing, not the made up names thing. So you're too focused on the made up names thing, which just doesn't matter. So
how
when
do you
you're trying to
determine
define
speciesation? What determines what whether or not two things are of the same species?
Lots of different criteria.
What criteria, and how do we arrive at those criteria?
We make our best guess through induction to try and describe what best describes reality.
Our best guess through induction to
Yes.
describe reality. Okay,
Yes.
so what processes, what methods would you use to arrive at that conclusion?
Science.
Okay, like let's say you have two
This
species.
isn't
of squirrel.
complicated. Like I don't want to go into a
This is
debate about how
extremely
social
simple.
constructs.
I agree. Wait, no, but
wait,
don't,
why
the
are you interrupting me?
ambiguity of your
Stop
answer
interrupting me and let me
suggests-
finish. So I don't care about your deluded perception on social constructionism. It's false. There are factually different species. They factually exist. It is a fact of reality.
You're like
we put
centuries
labels.
behind.
Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting. We put labels on them to try to describe them to the best of our abilities. They do exist. So that's just, you don't get to debate this. This is a fact. If you deny it, you're denying a difference from
What's a
elephants and
chair?
bats. Again, so don't interrupt. So
Okay, but answer
there are
that.
factually things.
You're done.
Chairs are not facts. Chairs are not literal things that exist as a category independent of human minds. Species are. Species exist independent
How?
of human minds. Chairs don't. Because they're determined by biology and things that have nothing to do with humans.
But
Chairs
I've
are
spoken to
determined by humans.
biologists, and they acknowledge that there is
don't
a
care.
social element.
I don't-
Wait,
I don't
hold
care.
on. Wait, I know you don't care because you don't know anything what you're talking
No,
about.
I know more
so
than you on this
the
topic.
process of speciesization is determined by a set of subjective categories that we've arrived at. You
Okay,
can
wait,
ask
wait,
any
can you pause for a
biologist this. This isn't secret.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I'm echoing. No. Okay. All right. So Vaush is he's trying to explain something. So here's the thing, and maybe you and I actually might disagree on this. When we're recognizing things, there's going to be some degree of normativity before that thing is recognized. There's going to be some choice. So, for instance, So when I say, do you have a first name? Do you ever give it out? Is it Tom?
Yes, Tom.
Okay. So when I say, does Tom exist? Arguably, there is no such thing as Tom, but we've agreed that there's a word, Tom, that refers to a collection of things. That collection of things might exist. Or when we look at like woman or man, you can say, do women exist? You can say, well, in the universe, is there a fact that women exist? Well, insofar as woman is like a collection of things, relationally, arguably no, but it refers to something real. There's some underlying real thing that it refers to. I think this is what Vaush is trying to get at here. He's just kind of bad at, at giving voice to that. Does that make sense? Or
how would that relate to the argument? Like, how would that go back to the position of?
Because what he's trying to fight you on is when he says some particular thing is socially constructed, it sounds like you're using certain words, but you're trying to get that there's an underlying fact of the matter about the thing. And he's trying to say, well, no, look, there's a lot of normativity that goes into deciding a thing. So he's saying what determines a species? You're saying, well, categories A, B, and C. But what he's asking is, well, who decided categories A, B, and C are what determined a species? We could determine a species in any other way, is what he's like trying to get there.
Yeah, I think we got to that a little bit later. But I didn't. The part I was missing with that argument is how does the fact of how we get to a specific term relate to my argument of that it actually corresponding to some fact of the matter. So even if there's some like variation in species, like it's determined by 26 different definitions of what a species is, they are all extremely similar. It's not like you can say a bat and an elephant are the same species. There is some relation between the objects in reality that make a difference between these two things, and we're just trying to make up the best criteria we can to differentiate them based on the differences they actually have.
Yeah, sure. And I think everybody would agree on this. He's arguing a different level of the conversation about like who chooses which features to value, basically.
Yeah, I think so. But I don't know how does that relate? Even if I just grant that, yes, the way we determine those is subjective, essentially socially constructed, whatever. How does that answer the question of the debate about is there like a fact of the matter of that there are these differences? Like if women are biologically different.
I don't know. You'd have to move to that part and see what he says.
Gotcha. I don't think he ever answered that part, but yeah, I'll bring it up.
You not understanding biology isn't my problem.
Have you read Charles Darwin?
Yes, wait. So we come up with labels to describe things that exist independent of our labels. We make them up.
Okay. So let's say we have two squirrels that are very genetically similar. How do we determine whether or not how do we determine whether or not they're the same species of squirrel or different species of squirrel?
We come up with a methodology that describes species and try to accurately label them.
Okay, I agree. Now, is that methodology in any way socially constructed?
Of course, all methodologies are socially constructed.
So the methodology by which we determine whether
What?
Oh, so yeah, you got that. Yeah.
Not two things are of different species is socially constructed.
Yes, the species themselves are not.
Okay.
The way we
So-
determine between
but-
a proton and a neutron is a method called science, which is
Wait,
socially
hold on.
constructed. The proton and the neutron are not socially
But
constructed.
species don't so when you say the method by which we distinguish between species is socially constructed, that determines the species. There's not like two different types of species, the ones we agree upon and the ones that already exist. There are only the differences we agree
I don't
upon
have to explain
existing.
basic philosophy to you. This is
Wait,
the
hold
difference
on.
between epistemology and ontology.
No, hold on. Your understanding of philosophy here is literally millennia out of date. The idea
it's- You're so ignorant on this.
of the world.
Vaush, epistemology and ontology. What
Gentlemen.
epistemology is the theory of knowledge, how we learn things. Ontology is the facts of the matter independent of how we know things.
We can keep
Our
talking
epistemology,
about one thing. We can keep going there, but we are like, unless we can
Off
quickly
topic,
tie
yes.
it
No,
back
it's
to the
no,
topic.
James.
it is-
I would love to reel back to the thing. The problem is the statement that saying trans women aren't women isn't transphobic because definitions are objective is a statement so far removed from reality that you have to go all the way back to epistemology before you can even begin to correct how many ways that's incorrect.
No. Definitions aren't objective, but if the definition refers to something objective, then that's the thing they're talking about. So if they make a definition that is meant to refer to an objective feature of the world,
How do
then
you
they're
know
not
what an objective feature of the world is?
science.
How do you how do you arrive at what an objective? Okay, so there are two types of speciesation. There's the stuff that we describe, the concepts that we arrive at through socialized processes. And then there's the objective species difference that you say exists ontologically. Now, how do you determine what is ontologically correct?
Epistemology. We use epistemology to try to learn about ontology.
Okay, so you agree that right now our understanding of species, this is like a red-tailed squirrel, this is like an alpine winter squirrel, whatever.
Yes, all of our understanding is subjective. It's all based off human conceptions.
Okay, so if you're arguing that all human understanding is based off subjective conceptualization, then of what relevance is ontological truth to our understanding of what a woman is?
Because if the definition is trying to correspond to
So is that like a coherent argument? I'm not saying something meaningless here. Like species are there before we discovered them, right? Like there's a difference between a squirrel and a bat.
Or there's an underlying set of facts that are, hopefully they exist independent of human minds. Yeah.
So like this was
Vaush carried through with this bad philosophy a year later because the point you're trying to make right now that he's not understanding is the same point that the Thomas guy tried to make that he didn't understand. And it's when Vaush was saying like, well, actually, because Thomas was trying to say, listen, whatever you call it, whatever you think it is, water is H2O and it always has been. That always exists. But then Vaush's response is, well, no, because some people call it agua, right? He's fixated on like the names or the categorizations of things rather than the things themselves, right? He's getting lost in that, he's getting lost in the context, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I saw the exact same parallels between my argument and my debate and his debate with Thomas Bogardus. But like, do you think he actually can tie this into the argument in some way, or is this just his go-to thing of social constructionism whenever he just doesn't know how to respond?
No, it's super easy. When you say that all things are arbitrary and socially constructed, then if all things are arbitrary and socially constructed, then there's only one reason to construct something, and that's because it yields some social good. And if you disagree with his construction, you therefore disagree with the social good. So that's basically how the argument goes. He's just trying to make you understand that the only way we organize things is for whatever gives us the most amount of good. So if you disagree with his level of organization, you're a bad person. That's essentially what the argument boils down to.
Do you think that he would actually try to make that argument, like specifically?
That's the argument that he is making. He might say it in more words to dress it up a little bit, but yeah, because to try to say that trans women aren't women, that's transphobic. Well, why is that transphobic? It's transphobic because women can be whatever we want them to be because it's arbitrary. Okay, well, that's kind of weird. Nope, it's not. We only make categories that are useful to us. Therefore, this is a useful category. Unless you disagree and you want to make a new category that harms trans women. So if we agree that all categories are arbitrary and you want to make one that's harmful to people and I want to make one that's not harmful to people, then your whole motivation for trying to separate these things is to be hurtful or evil. That's the whole argument, essentially.
And there's a similarity I see between this and many religious arguments, like, that old parody.
It is religious. Yeah, of course. Because your epistemology and your metaphysics, more specifically your ontologies, are like coming like from your meta ethics. Or it's like really weird. You have like, this is what goodness is, and that's informing every other decision you make, right? Well, what's the difference between that or that? Well, what's more good? I don't fucking know. Well, that's your answer, right? And that becomes the basis through which all definitions are built, is essentially like the answer is, well, what is a woman, or what is a trans woman, or whatever? Well, the answer is whatever is the goodest thing, which is a weird way to deal with non-ethical categories, in my opinion. But
so do you think it's a fair criticism to say that like feminism is a religion in this context? I don't know what you would call Vaush's ideology.
well, when I say that things are when I say religion, I'm not usually talking about a set of like logical statements. I'm usually talking about like a social attitude towards something. When I call something a religion, that's what I was referring to more specifically. In this, I would just call his position incoherent or ridiculously circular and like easily disprovable, because you could point to a couple of concepts or words where it's like, okay, Vaush, if everything is arbitrary, how can we have a conversation about anything? Like, it's actually pretty important that words mean things. Arguably, it's the most important feature of the human race, is that we can communicate with each other. And by definition, words are things that are one thing and not another thing. So it can't be arbitrary. It has to have a strict definition. Otherwise, language becomes private and incoherent, right?
Yeah, it becomes like you said, it's circular, it's self-defeating. If no words mean anything, then why does your use of words more legitimate than my use of words?
Exactly, yeah.
Ontology,
We're
then you
always
making up
trying
a
to correspond to
wait.
ontology.
Let me finish the answer before you keep going. So if we are no, we can make up things without trying to correspond to ontology all the time. It's just called making stuff up. So if one person defines real in the context of what corresponds to reality, objectively independent of opinion, intuition, psychology, and their definition means not including those things, objective, and that's what they mean by corresponding to
What is
reality.
an ontological woman?
Whatever the metaphysical God who knows everything could define woman as, that would be it.
Is there a way for humans to determine what an ontological woman is?
With the best technology, we can infer with induction, yes.
Wait, what technological processes could you use to arrive at what a woman is? Isn't that a philosophical question?
Well, science is a part of philosophy too.
Okay,
So back for one sec.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys are on a different context here. You're arguing about whether or not you can collect some set of facts and analyze them and then determine if that's a woman. He's arguing about which facts should be considered to make a woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think like I was tying this into the species thing. Like, is there an objective difference between a squirrel and a bat?
Mm-hmm.
And there is some fact of the matter. There are some facts in reality that do differentiate those things.
Yeah,
and so
but he's trying to say that like the choice to differentiate those things, like for instance, we wouldn't say that there's right now we don't say that people with blue eyes or brown eyes are different species. We could, but we don't. And so he's kind of arguing like, well, who makes that determination of the different species? Because that answer isn't found in nature. That's a normative answer. It comes from philosophy, right? Well, we're choosing to make this a human or whatever. And that's the argument that that's the level that he's arguing on. He's trying to say who chooses which facts determine what a woman is. And then you're arguing that like, well, science can look at things to see things, but obviously the determination of what is a woman is a philosophical question, not a scientific one, right?
Yeah. So this is the part where I was lost in the conversation, like talking past him. I was trying to like go down the road he was looking at, trying to look for a connection to the overall argument.
Sure.
I think just like if I was going to rephrase my core argument from then today, it would be more something like people were inherently used the word woman to refer to biology rather than psychology, and they have for thousands of years. And so it's not inherently transphobic because they didn't specifically design this in order to exclude a certain group of people. And there's no inherent bigotry in that definition. And so my argument would be that people use the word to mean something in ontology, and that's the goal, and that isn't inherently transphobic. And so it wouldn't make a difference how we came up with the term. It's more like, did the method that they used to come up with the term include some kind of inherent bigotry to exclude anybody? Well, no, there's just what had utility for that group at the time.
Sure, maybe, yeah.
The ontological woman. How would you arrive at this determination?
We would look at speciesization from the course of human history and determine the major different sets.
Don't make somebody like this. You need to make these people answer questions. Don't let them lead you around and do shit like this. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. How do you get them to answer questions?
How do I get them to answer questions? Just say like, you tell me what you think an ontological whatever is, right? That's what you should do. Okay.
So like just reverse it, mirror the question back at them.
Yeah.
Cool. Definitely give that a shot.
Sex
Okay.
groups and what
Wait,
their
give me
relations.
But we're not talking.
What?
Can you give me 1 second? I gotta step away for a moment. Okay, hold on 1 second.
Sure, no problem.
Sorry, I'm here, man.
All right, cool.
Where are we going? Go. Drive me there.
Talking about sex, right? We're talking about gender.
No, so that would be the difference here. It's like if
Can you
someone
ontologically prove that sex and gender are the same thing?
Stop interrupting. So what we're talking about here is if one person has a definition of woman that is trying to correspond to the biological facts and not the psychological facts, then they're
What
going
if we
to
say
reject your
biology isn't
definition.
relevant?
Why are
One
you
sec,
still
let's hear the rest
interrupting?
from Tom.
Why are you still
Sorry.
interrupting? So if a person wants to use their definition of woman and wants to make it correspond to the biological facts as much as possible, which they have a right to do, that is, biological facts are a real thing independent of a subjective opinion. They are objectively existing. They have the right to do that. Now, you can define woman differently. You can say you want to include the psychological facts, but they also have the right to do the opposite. And it's not transphobic. They're just disagreeing with you on what the definition should
Sounds
be.
like you're saying it's subjective.
Yes.
Okay.
So both definitions are all subjective, but they're trying to get their definition to correspond to reality independent of all the subjective stuff, whereas you are adopting the subjective stuff.
Well, no, I would argue that it's actually the opposite, that you're post hoc justifying social biases, and I'm the one who's trying to arrive at the heart of like what is ultimately a linguistic distinction. I would actually argue you're engaging in a much greater degree of subjectivity than I am, and I think there's way more philosophy backing up the ontological relevance of my position than yours.
So the definition.
Well, so here's my question, because you're right that he's trying to take this position that he's going the linguistic route, but how does that relate to the topic? Like, even if we grant that this is purely a linguistic distinction of you choosing to use woman in one way or the other, that doesn't say that one person is wrong for doing it. Even so, yes, one person defines woman as a biological trend rather than a psychological one, and one differentiates between gender and sex.
I think, like I said before, I don't think that it's hard to analyze this, because I think you're trying really hard to like think about this from all the different rational angles. But I'm pretty sure this is all just like morally loaded, like post hoc justified stuff from him. There's not going to be like this level of thought or attention paid to the other side. So I don't even know if it's worth it with him as an actor here to like try to do this sort of analysis.
I think that's fair. Like, yeah, I've kind of got that feeling, but I've always, do you know of anybody who does like actually try to engage from their side to analyze the position where you can make progress intellectually with?
Wait, say that one more time.
Like someone who could, like, on the Breadtube side, who you could actually analyze the position, try to like find some logical coherence in their argument, or do they?
No, it's Breadtube is like,
it?
it's synonymous with dipshittery. Like you're not going to find anybody over there that does that. There's nobody intelligent over there. There's a reason why that whole community died, and why they don't debate people, and why they don't do stuff like this, right?
Gotcha. Because yeah, that's what I've been looking for. I want to actually.
Oh, actually, I'll throw out two names for people if you want to argue. There's a guy called. Do you know who Lonerbox is?
Yes, I've heard of him. I don't think I've talked to him though.
Okay, I don't know if he would debate you on this or not. Lonerbox is a really chill and reasonable dude. There's another guy called Rose Wrist. Have you ever heard of him?
Mm-mm.
Okay, he's another like, these are like smaller content creators, but these guys are like pretty chill. I don't know if they'd be considered Breadtube or not, but yeah. But any of the bigger, larger Breadtubes, like Breadtubers, like these guys thrive on demagoguery. That's where their audiences come from. That's what people tune into them to listen to. Like it's basically just shitting on opponents, laughing at people, making fun of people, and then pointing out how like obviously bigoted they are. Like that's what they do. You don't go to Breadtube for like rational, reasonable arguments about philosophy or anything. You go there because they're going to make funny jokes and tell you like the 52 different ways that how people that disagree with them are evil. Like that's it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that was my thing. I was trying to like intellectually engage with these people to find out what their arguments are. Like I think Jangles is the most honest.
Oh, Bojangles. No, it's not Bojangles. It's just Jangles. Jay Jangles. Yeah.
Just
he's
Jangles,
a really, he's a really cool dude. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah. Do you want to keep going? Because I think you've answered most of my questions. Yeah. If there's no like actual intellectual content to what they're saying, that's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, no. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Damn. If you would have told me that in the email, I would have just skipped ahead. Yeah. I don't think when it comes, there's not much like intellectuality to analyze when it comes to these arguments. It's all just kind of like this guy's good and this guy's bad, and then I'm gonna like try to invent ways to show you why. That's kind of it. Unfortunately, there's not much else going on here. I don't think.
So the best debate strategy with these guys is more just to take a cynical route and try to make fun of them as much as possible, and not actually focus on intellectual debate.
It depends on what your goal is. I mean, you can have a debate with them, but you can't approach it like, oh, like we're both two truth seekers trying to figure out what is right and true. You're dealing with somebody that's fighting you in the realm of optics that while you're trying to be right, that's not going to work. You have to be cognizant of the game that they're playing so that you can kind of like work to fight against it, basically, or at least be aware of what's going on, right? So when he's asking you like these bizarre hypotheticals and stuff, you've got to show like, well, hold on, like if your hypothetical holds true, then it would show this thing that's bad for you. Like you've got to demonstrate like negative outcomes and other stuff, because they're not dealing in the world of like logic and everything. They're dealing with the it's all just like what's morally good or bad, you know?